That night with my son Lucas was by far the craziest but yet most exciting night I have ever experienced in my life. My name is Michael, and I want to share a story about something that happened between me and my son Lucas. It's no teasy to talk about, but it's something I've kept inside for too long. Lucas is 19 now, but this all started a few years ago after my wife Barbara passed away. Losing Barbara was one of the hardest things I've ever faced, and it left Lucas and me alone to navigate life with her. At first it was difficult. Lucas was scared and withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room or out with friends. He avoided talking about Barbara or anything to do with her death, and I didn't want to push him. Instead, I focused on making our home feel as warm and welcoming as possible. I cooked his favorite meals, left little notes of encouragement on his desk, and tried to make sure he knew I was there for him if ever needed to talk. But for months he remained distant. Then one evening he walked into the kitchen while I was cleaning up after dinner. His sudden presence startled me, but I was happy to see him. It wasn't often that he sought me out like this. "Do you need help, Dad?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I tornadoed him, surprised by the offer. "Sure, you can dry the dishes," I said, handing him a towel. We worked in silence for a while, and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. It was the first time I had voluntarily spent time with me in what felt like forever. "How was school today?" I asked, trying to start a conversation. "It was fine," he said, without looking up. That was all. I didn't push him further. "If you ever want to talk, I'm hard," I added, gently glancing at him. Out of the corner of my eye, he nodded but didn't say anything more. And over the next few weeks, I started noticing little changes. Lucas began spending more time around me, sitting with me in the living room while I watched TV, or helping me with small tasks around the house. He even began to open up, telling me about his classes and his plans for college. I felt a glimmer of hope, like we were finally finding our way back to some kind of normal. But then one evening something happened that made me question everything. We were having dinner together. Lucas had cooked that night a simple pasta dish he'd learned from a friend. As we ate, he looked at me and said, "You're amazing, Dad." I laughed a little, brushing off the compliment. "Thanks, Lucas, that means a lot." I sat, trying to keep my tone light, but his expression didn't change. He looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach flip. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice soft but cautious. "Nothing," he said, quickly shaking his head. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. The moment felt strange, but I told myself I wasn't rethinking it. He was just being wasn't he? The crazy night hadn't happened yet, but this was definitely the start for it, because after that evening things started to change. Lucas began to hover around me more often, finding reasons to sit close to me on the couch or linger in the kitchen while I cooked. First, I thought it was sweet. I told myself he was just trying to reconnect with Tidar. Well, the time we'd spent grieving in our own separate ways. But then there were the looks. His eyes would linger on longer than they should, his compliments becoming more frequent and more personal. "You look really nice today, Dad," he said one morning as I stood at a sink washing dishes. "Thanks, Weathered," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. But the way he said it, the way he looked at me, made me feel uneasy. On evening, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie. Lucas had chosen it a comedy we had both seen a dozen times before. Halfway through, I realized he was sitting closer to me than usual. Our shoulders were almost touching, and when I shifted slightly, he didn't move away. "You're always so busy," he said, suddenly breaking the silence. "You never take time for yourself." I smiled, a little caught off guard. "That's what dads do, Lucas. There's always something to take care of." Shook his head, his gaze fixed on my "You do too much. You deserve a break." His words made my chest tighten. "That's sweet off you to say," I replied, but I'm venereally, and that night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, gripping the moment over and over and mimicked. Was it just an innocent gesture, or was I imagining something more? What was happening between us? I would soon find out. In the days that followed, I noticed Lucas finding reasons to be near me more. If I was cooking, he'd come into the kitchen to talk. If I was in the garden, he'd wander outside and sit with him. His compliments continued each on, making me feel more unsettled. And to be honest, I noticed myself doing some more often. "To you make this house feel alive," he said one afternoon. As I folded laundry, I froze for a moment, sure of how to respond. "Thank you, Lucas," I said, finally forcing a smile, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, and Not in a way was comfortable with the unease I felt, grew bigger and bigger. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things that Lucas was just being kind. Maybe even trying to make up for the distance between us after Barbara's death, but it wasn't just. Compliments it was the way he acted around me, how he always seemed to bother watching me finding reasons to bick lows, and I hadn't quite figured out yet. I did the same to him one afternoon I was cooking in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. I heard Lucas coming behind me, his footsteps soft on the tiled floor. I didn't turn around. I was trying to focus on the task at hand, hoping he'd just grab a snack and leave. "Do you need help, Dad?" he asked. I glanced over my shoulder and gave him a quick smile. "Sure, you can slice this carrots," I said, sliding the cutting board toward him. He stepped up beside me, his movements deliberate, and started cutting. For a while, we worked in silence. I thought maybe it would just be a quiet, pleasant moment. Something normal, but he stopped cutting and turned to look at me. "You've done so much for me," said his voice low. I glanced at him confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, after Dad died, you've taken care of everything. You didn't have to, but you did," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. I felt a pang of emotion in my chest. "Of course I did, Lucas. You're my son. I love you," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. He nodded, but his gaze didn't waver. "I just don't think I ever said thank you for all of it. You don't have to thank me," I said, quickly turning back to the stove. "That's what dads do." He didn't respond, but could feel him watching me. The moment felt too heavy, too intense, and I wanted nothing more than for it to end. Finale picked up the knife and started cutting again, and I let out a small breath of relief. After dinner that night, he sat on the couch with a book, hoping to lose myself in the pages. Lucas came into the living room and sat down next to Manette in his usual spot on the other end, off the couch but right next to me. "Water, you reading?" he asked, leaning closer. "See the cover? It's just a novel," I said, holding it up for him to see. "Nothing too exciting. Can I read it with you?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. Lucas hadn't shown much interest in reading since he was a kid, and I couldn't remember the last time we'd done something like this together. Part of me wanted to say no to tell him I needed some time to myself, but another part of me didn't want to push him away. "Sure," I said, scooting over. Slightly to give him more space, he leaned in close, shoulder brushing mine as I began to read aloud. At first it felt like any other moment we might have shared years ago, before everything got so complicated, but as the minutes passed, it became increasingly aware of how close it was, how intently he was watching Manette. The book. When I finished the chapter, I closed the book and set it down. "That's a no for tonight," I said, trying to keep me voice light. "Thanks for reading to Mahe," said, his tone soft. "You're welcome," I replied, standing up and heading toward me bedroom. "Good night, Lucas." "Good night, Dad," he said. But there was something in his voice, something I couldn't quite place. But the next morning when I commanded the kitchen, Lucas was already there. Had made coffee and set out breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. "Good morning, Dad," he said, his voice cheerful. "He made you some coffee." "Thank you, Lucas," I said, cautiously sitting down at the table. He sat across from me watching as I took a sip. "You work so hard," he said suddenly. "You deserve to be taken care of too." I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "That's very sweet of you," I said finally. "But you don't have to do all this for me. I want to," he said firmly. After breakfast, I retreated to the garden, hoping to clear my head. The air was cool, and the scent of blooming flowers surrounded me. I sat on the bank, staring out at the neatly trimmed hedges, trying to make sense of everything. I wasn't sure how long I'd been sitting there when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Lucas walking toward me, his hands in his pockets. "Can I sit with you?"
Yes.
he asked. "Of course," I said, though part of me wanted to say no. He sat down beside me, leaving a small space between us. For a while, we were silent, only sounds coming from the rustling leaves and distant bird song. "You've been wheeled lately," he said finally. "I've just had a lot on my mind," I replied, keeping me gaze fixed on the garden. "Is it about me?" he asked, his tone soft but serious. Question caught me off guard, and I hesitated before answering. "Why would you think that?" He shrugged. "I don't know, I just feel like maybe I've done something to upset you." "You haven't upset me," I said quickly. "I've just been tired." He nodded, but didn't say anything else. After a few more minutes, he stood up. "I'll leave you alone," he said, his voice quiet. I watched him walked back into the house, a knot of guilt forming in my chest. He hadn't done anything wrong, Haiti, so why did? I feel so uneasy. The days that followed felt strange, as though a heavy cloud had settled over the house. I tried to act normal, cooking meals, tidying up, and going about my usual routine, but I couldn't shake the tension I felt whenever Lucas was nearby. He hadn't done anything overtly wrong, but his presence lingered in a way that felt different and thin on night. I made a conscious effort to keep some distance. After dinner, I retreated to my bedroom earlier than usual, hoping for some quiet time to myself. I curled up with a book, letting the soft glow of the lamp create a small cocoon of warmth that felt like a rare free from the unsettling dynamic that had begun to develop. I felt tension and excitement in me when thinking about Lucas, and it was the first time I recognized it. It caught me off guard. A sigh. Couldn't accept the fact that Lucas was my own son, but just as I started to relax, there was a soft knock at the door. Dad. Lucas's voice was low, almost hesitant. I hesitated before answering. Yees can. Come in. I glanced at the clock. It was late, far past the time. Lucas usually went to bed. Is something wrong? I asked, sitting up slightly. I just wanted to talk, he said. I sighed, setting me book aside. Come in. The door creaked open, and Lucas stepped inside. He looked at front, somehow less like I was a confident young man he usually portrayed, more like the boy I used to comfort after nightmares. When he was little, Hess stood in the doorway for a moment, unsure of whether to come closer. What's on your mind? I asked, patting the edge of the bed. He sat down, his movements slow and deliberate. For a moment he didn't say anything, his eyes fixed on the floor. Then he looked, Oopie's gaze meeting mine. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? I asked, my voice cautious. For making Yo feel uncomfortable, he said, his Tonneson chair. I know. I've been acting different lately, and I don't want you to think I'm trying to make things weird between us. I blinked, surprised by his honesty. Lucas, I started, but he cut me off. I've been feeling a lot off things, and I don't really know how to deal with them, he said, his voice cracking slightly. But I don't want to hurt you. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I couldn't fully grasp. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Lucas, it's okay to feel confused sometimes, I said gently. But you need to remember that I'm your dad, and our relationship has boundaries. Handed, his eyes glistening with unshed eye. No, I'm sorry, he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. I gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze before pulling my hand away. Let not worry about it anymore, I said, trying to keep my tone light. We'll figure it out together there. We'll say certain tension and excitement between us that I couldn't quite nameth. Look in his eyes told me there was more coming, and I gave that same look back to him as well. He nodded, and standing up. Good night, Dad, he said softly before leaving the room. I watched him go, a strange mix of relief and sadness settling over me. He had acknowledged the tension between us, which felt like a step in the right direction, but I couldn't help wondering if things would truly go back to normal. Only thing was for sure to me, and that was that this was not the last time who will do this, and I was right. I was definitely right. As for the next time who will do this, things would end a lot differently than the next morning. I woke up feeling more exhausted than usual. The conversation with Lucas had kept me awake for hours, my mind racing with what-ifs and unanswered questions. I got up, went through my morning routine, and tried to shake the lingering unease. Lucas seemed different that day, quieter, more reserved. He kept to himself, spending most of the day in his room. Part of me wanted to check on him, to make sure he was okay, but another part of me felt like I needed to give him space that evening. As I was folding laundry in the living room, Lucas came in and sat down on the couch without saying a word, watching me silently as I work at the quiet between us felt heavy and struggled to think of something to say. You've been quiet today? I said, final lynching. At him, he shrugged. Just thinking about anything in particular? I asked, trying to sound casual about us. Hesed, his voice barely above a whisper. It froze for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. What do you mean? I asked carefully. He hesitated, his eyes meeting mine. I mean, I know things haven't been weird lately, and I don't want it to be like that anymore, he said. I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. I don't want that either. I said finally, but we need to figure out how to move forward, nodded. A faint smile crossing his lips. We will, he said for a brief moment. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe things will get better, maybe? We could move past this and find a way to rebuild our relationship. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were. Stand in the edge of something I didn't fully understand, or maybe I did understand it, but I did not want to accept it yet. The quiet unease that had settled over Thea House didn't go away. Lucas tried to act normal, but I could see the struggle in his eyes, the way he hesitated before speaking or lingered too long when we crossed paths. I wanted to believe his apology barbered the end of everything, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. And then one evening, as I was laying in bed scrolling through my phone, an attempt to unwind it happened again. It was late and the house wasn't, except for the soft creak of the ceiling fan above me. I had just begun to drift off when I heard a faint knock at me bedroom door. Dad Lucas's voice, soft almost. Hesitant, I sat up, my heart sinking. Yes, can I come in? He asked. I glanced at the CL. It was well past midnight. Lucas, it's late, I said, trying to keep my tone firm. What's wrong there, Rose? A pause before he replied, I just need to talk to you something in. His voice made me hesitate. I took a deep breath, then said, okay, come in. The door cracked open, and Lucas stepped inside. He looked unsure of himself, his hand shoved into his pockets as he lingered near the doorway. What is it, Lucas? He asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He hesitated, his gaze flickering between me and the floor. I've been thinking a lot about what I said the other night, he began, his voice low and adjust. I feel like I need to be honest with you. My chest tightened. Honest about what? I asked carefully. He stepped closer, sitting down on the edge of the bed. About how I feel, he said, his voice trembling slightly. I know it's wrong, Andy. Tried to ignore it, but I can't stop thinking about you, Dad. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at him. I'm in dressing. Lucas, you can't. I started, but cut me off. I know, he said quickly, his voice full of desperation. I know it's wrong, but I can't help it. You've been of everything to me since Dad died. You're reckoned and strong, and you've done so much for me. I don't know how to stop feeling this way. His words hit me like a physical blow. I felt frozen, unable to move or speak as his confession hung in there. Lucas, you're my son, I said finally, my voice shaking. I love you, but not like that. This has to stop. I know, he whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. I needed to tell you. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. Lucas, what you're feeling is a result of everything we've been through. It's no trial. You're young, and you're confused, bet. This isn't right. We need to work through this together, he nodded, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know I said, my heart breaking at the sight of him. But we can't let this continue. Our good person, Lucas. And you'll move past this. He wiped his eyes, standing up slowly. Good night, Dad. Hesita's voice barely audible. Good night, Ty replied, watching as he left the room and closed the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, I locked the door and sat down on the bed, my hands trembling. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Felt overwhelmed with guilt and confusion, questioning everything I had and that might have led to this moment. I loved Lucas with all my heart, but his feelings were something I couldn't ignore or dismiss. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words in my head, trying to make sense of them. I told myself it was just a phase, a moment off confusion that would pass. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The next morning, Lucas was keet. He barely said a word at breakfast stand when he left for school. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. I spent the day trying to focus on work. Ow, my mind kept drifting back to our conversation. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. When Lucas came home that evening, he seemed to stand avoiding eye contact and retreating to Tohei's room almost immediately. I wanted Tohei's to him to make sure he was okay. Booty didn't know where to start. I felt trapped, unsure of how to handle the situation. Without making things worse, later that night, I was sitting in Thalving room, staring at the TV. Without really watching it, the house was quietened. I could feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. Suddenly I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. To Lucas standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Can I sit with you? Asked. I hesitated for a moment. Before nodding, of course, he walked over and sat down on the couch, leaving a small space between us. For a while we sat in silence. Tension between us almost unbearable, Dad, he said, finally, his voice soft. I didn't want to lose you, I said quickly, but we need to set boundaries, Lucas, for both of us, he nodded, slowly his gaze fixed on the floor. I understand, I reached out, placing a hand on his knee. We'll get through this, I said gently. Butu, have to trust me. He looked up at Maze, eyes filled with emotion. I do, Hest. I gave him a small smile, hoping to reassure him then we'll be okay. As I sit there, I felt a glimmer of hope. That we could move past this, but deep down, Ick knew. It would take time. The days after our conversation were tense. A quiet Lucas kept his distance, and I tried toked, as though everything was normal, but truth weighed heavily on me. I hoped that, acknowledging the situation and setting boundaries would help us both move forward, yet something deep inside allayed me. The silence between us wasn't to fix what had been broken then. One final night, I went to bed early, ousted from a day spent trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. The house was quiet, and the cool night air wafted gently through my open window. It tried to let the rhythmic hum of the fan lull me to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I knew, I was being pulled from sleep by the sound off my door creaking open. My heart jumped at us. I blinked in the darkness, trying to orient myself. Dad, Lucas's voice whisperly. A whisper, but it was unmistakably. Sat up, reaching for the bedside lamp. Warm glow filled the room, illuminating Lucas standing hesitantly in the doorway. He looked unsure, Hishans fidgeting at his sides. Lucas sighed, my voice thick with sleep and confusion. What are you doing? He stepped Dinto, the room, his movements slow and deliberate. I couldn't sleep, he said quietly. I needed to see you. My chest tightened as I tried to steady my breathing. It's late, said my voice firmer. Now you need to go back. To bed, Ickno, he said, his eyes locking onto mine, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything. I swung my legs over the city-if, the bed sitting upright. Lucas, I was thinking about you too, but we talked about this. I said gently, I love you, but it's not something we can talk about anymore. He took another step forward, his expression a mix of determination and vulnerability. I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel, said his voice trembling. You're the only one who's ever really been there for me. You've always cared about me in a way no one else has. My throat felt tight as I tried to find the right words. Lucas, I care about you because I'm your dad, I said firmly. That's my job, but the way you're feeling, it's not healthy. It's not right. He stood there for a moment, his shoulders slumping as the weight of my words settled over him. I'm sorry, he said, softly, tears glistening in his eyes. I just didn't know how else to tell you. My heart broke at the sight of him, but I forced myself to remain calm. It's okay to feel confused, Lucas, I said, but this is something you need to work through. Gande, I'll help you as your dad, but only as your dad. The words didn't feel right as I definitely wanted something else, and I could see the disappointment in his eyes, which made me regret my choice. He nodded slowly, his gaze is dropping tough. Floor, I don't want to lose you, he sobbed, his voice barely audible. You won't, he assured him. But we have to move forward, Lucas, for both of us. And when I said those words, something in me shifted all of a sudden. I asked myself, what am I doing? Why can't I just help my son with whatever he wants? He's my son. It hurted him to see how my words disappointed Hyman. I did not want it anymore. And besides, I liked the idea of what Huan did as well, somehow, maybe because Imes is Barbara a lot as well. And after a second of silence, I said, Yaukno, what come here? As I invited him. Tazat beside me, he moved towards me, and I could see him opening up again. Look me in the eyes, I said, while I leaned in towards him. He leaned in towards me as well, and then it happened. We kissed each other. It was as if a bomb of tension exploded. There it was so good that it made sure the kiss deepened, and after a minute or two he reached back and stopped kissing. It wasn't because he wasn't doubt or something, no. It was because he started grabbing me in places only Barbara had grabbed me before. And as you can probably tell, won't even further than that. I hope Yano understand why I told you this. Waste craziest but yet most exciting night of my life. It was amazing. After we both had finished, there was a long silence here. You okay? He said. Yes, don't worry, he replied for a long moment. I think 10 to 20 minutes the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the fan. Then Lucas turned and walked toward W, the door paused in the doorway, glancing back at Am. "Good night, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Good night, Lucas." I replied, my heart aching as I watched him leave. "Thank you for everything." "I have to thank you, Dad," he said. When the door clicked shut behind him, I let out Ashiki, breath, the tension in my chest finally easing. I lay back down staring at the ceiling as the events of the past few weeks replayed in my mind. I knew Westel had a long road ahead, but for the first time I felt a sliver of hope that I could find our way back to a healthier relationship. Finally, the tension had snapped, and the next morning Lucas was quiet but composed. He joined him for breakfast, and while the conversation was light, I could sense a shift in his demeanor. He seemed more at ease, as though he had finally let go of some of the weight he'd been carrying over the next few weeks. Things began to feel more normal. Lucas started spending more time with friends, and his focus shifted back to school and his plans for the future. We didn't talk about what had happened again, but the unspoken understanding between us was clear. We were both trying to move on. As we sat on the porch watching the sunset on evening, Lucas turned to me and said, "Thanks for being patient with me, Dad. Thank you for everything you do for and with me. Thanks for accepting me for who I am and helping me on every aspect, even on aspects where dads usually don't help their son with." I looked at him surprised, but touched by his words. I lay my hand in his arm. "Of course," I said. "That's what
Dads do."
He smiled, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt Joan in that moment. I knew we weren't going to be okay. I'm still not sure about what I did since it happened. Etha's happened a couple times more evening besides that. I enjoy it myself as well. I know I help Lucas a lot. Maybe it's just because we both want to make up for the loss of Barbara, or maybe it's something else I don't know. I needed to tell the story to someone, to get to know their people's opinions. Should I stop doing this with Looker? Is it maybe even more normal than think? What are your thoughts on it? Please tell me in the comments. It would help me a lot. Thank you.